It was a year of fires and a year of melting ice. 2007, the year when the world acknowledged that climate change is man-made and poses the biggest threat to the future of our planet. Millions of people fled their homes because of floods, cyclones and climate disasters, because of continued unrest in Darfur, or because of continued violence in Iraq. Amidst all these challenges, 2007 was the beginning of a new era for the United Nations as Ban Ki-moon took office as Secretary General. Ban Ki-moon was the first UN Secretary General to visit Antarctica and see the icebergs melt before his very eyes. The temperature rises in Antarctica 7 times faster than the global average.
I'd like to send out a strong message to the international community. My message is that we must act now.
Another priority, bringing peace to Sudan.
I'm here to bring you the message of hope, peace and security, and water.
Darfur is one of the biggest humanitarian emergencies of our time. 2 million people are displaced and 4 million need food aid in an ongoing conflict between rebels and the Sudanese government that is exacerbated by drought and extreme water shortage.
Raise their hands.
In July, the Security Council agreed to establish the largest and most complex field operation the UN has ever undertaken, a hybrid UN and African Union mission with 26,000 peacekeepers and civilian police.
I want to create the foundation of a lasting peace and security. My goal is to lock in the progress we have made so far.
To build a lasting peace, the United Nations is also working on a political solution to the conflict. Rebel groups met in Juba to find a unified position ahead of peace talks with the government. And the Darfur peace process continued in Libya with representatives of the government of Sudan, rebel movements and civil society, as UN and African Union mediators helped them find a negotiating platform. The chief mediators also met the rebels who were unable to come to the peace talks and encouraged them to join the process. Iraq, another ongoing humanitarian crisis. More than 4 million Iraqis have been uprooted. They either fled the country and put enormous stress on already fragile economies in the region, or had to move to safer areas within Iraq. With borders closing and money running out, many feel trapped. Slowly, some Iraqis are returning home to a scarred country. Security has improved, but remains unpredictable. It will take time to rebuild the infrastructure. People in Sadr city get water only from a truck, as often as security permits.
Our problem is water. It is the most important thing for us. If it wasn't for UNICEF, we would die of thirst.
UNICEF started a house-to-house campaign to immunize all children against polio. 20,000 mobile vaccinators reached out to children all over Iraq, in cities, conflict zones and refugee camps. The Security Council resolved to increase the UN's assistance to the Iraqi people.
Sergio Vieira de Mello.
The UN family is still mourning colleagues who were killed 4 years ago at the bombing of UN headquarters in Baghdad. Tragically, the UN was targeted again this year, this time in Algiers, when a suicide bomber attacked the officers of the UN Development Programme and the UN Refugee Agency. In Gaza, fighting continued. The Middle East Quartet welcomed the commitment of the Israeli and Palestinian leaders to launch bilateral negotiations that will address all the problems confronting the realization of Israeli-Palestinian peace. In Lebanon, nearly 1 million unexploded ordnance, like cluster bombs, remain a deadly legacy of last year's war. The UN teaches children to avoid bombs and helps them overcome their trauma. In the UN's biggest maritime operation, 16 vessels patrol the Lebanese coast to prevent the smuggling of weapons. To bring the fragile country back on a path to reconciliation an international tribunal worked to bring the murderers of Rafiq Hariri to justice. UN investigator Serge Bramets.
That the perpetrators had and most likely still have operational capabilities available in Beirut.
Iran's nuclear program continued to be a source of heated debate within the international community. Iran's president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, defended his country's right to use nuclear power as a clean source of energy under the UN's Non-Proliferation Treaty, but the international community was skeptical and imposed sanctions on Iran. The director of the UN's Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Mohammad al-Baradei.
Iran is not asked to give up its right, but simply take a time out of its enrichment activities as a show of goodwill.
In July, the IAEA monitored the shutdown of North Korea's atomic bomb program after years of intense diplomatic effort. When the leaders of the two Koreas met for the first time in 20 years, a small step across the border was a big advance towards reconciliation. Soon after, the General Assembly adopted a resolution encouraging peace, security and unification on the Korean peninsula. North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Soo-hon.
Nothing is more urgent and important than the reunification of our nation, which has been living for more than half a century with the sufferings of territorial division.
In Afghanistan, violence increased by 30% over the last year, endangering recent progress in healthcare and education. Some schools for girls needed protection from Taliban attacks. The UN assistance mission in Afghanistan continued its efforts to help the people rebuild their shattered country. And the UN's Office on Drugs and Crime is stepping up efforts to combat the booming opium trade. UN Special Representative Tom Koenigs.
The dangers posed by the record poppy harvest have gone beyond the society and health issues, as it has encouraged an alliance of convenience between the insurgents and drug lords.
In Myanmar, a saffron revolution against 45 years of military rule and deepening poverty. Peaceful demonstrations by Buddhist monks were brutally attacked by the army. Fearing more instability in the region, the Secretary General sent Ibrahim Gambari as special envoy to Myanmar.
The government further assured me that it will release more detainees and that no more arrests will be carried out.
In April, the Security Council went on a field trip to the Balkans. The future of Kosovo is still in limbo. The parties couldn't agree on autonomy for the UN-administered province. 2007 was a record year for UN peacekeeping. More than 100,000 soldiers and police served in 17 missions. Almost 100 men and women paid the ultimate sacrifice for peace. In Haiti, the UN Stabilization Mission helped to dismantle armed gangs and strengthened the rule of law. Inflation was reduced by 10%. No-go zones disappeared. In Liberia, an all-female police unit from India focuses on the prevention of violence against women.
The training was strenuous, tough, so that my girls are mentally, emotionally and physically prepared.
After 14 years of war, Liberia is on a rocky road to recovery, with an 85% unemployment rate and 3/4 of the population living below the poverty line. Now 50,000 local workers and ex-combatants are fixing the damaged road system. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the UN mission MONUC trained the national army with the goal of instilling professionalism and awareness of human rights. Peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo is still very fragile. More than 100,000 people fled from fresh violence in Kivu province. Many are unreachable for relief workers. The lucky ones find help in makeshift camps. Even a family of highly endangered mountain gorillas were murdered in the crossfire. In Somalia, after 25 years of conflict, living conditions are worsening. Thousands of desperate Somalis try to make their way across the sea to Yemen, and hundreds are losing their lives in the process. This beach in Yemen has become a makeshift graveyard. In 2007, natural disasters were more destructive than war. 20 million environmental refugees fled from floods in India and Bangladesh, or from Africa's biggest floods in 30 years. Vital food crops were damaged, harvests failed. Thousands of people depended on food aid. The weather extremes were reported from every continent. For the first time ever, the Security Council put climate change on its agenda. Foreign Minister of the Maldives, Abdullah Shahid.
For the Maldives, a mean sea level rise of 2 meters would suffice to virtually submerge the entire country of small islands, most of which barely rise over 2 meters above mean sea level. That would be the death of a nation.
Climate change is linked to human activity, concluded a report by 2,000 scientists from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. Greenhouse gases cause the temperature to increase, especially in the Arctic, where the ice is melting faster than ever before. Sea levels will rise, and polar bears are in danger of extinction. 160 world leaders gathered in New York for the world's biggest climate change meeting to hear a wake-up call. California's governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
The rich nations and the poor nations have different responsibilities, but one responsibility we all have, and that is action. Action, action, action.
The Kyoto Protocol to reduce emissions is due to expire in 2012. Before the year's end, world leaders met again in Bali to set a timetable to reach a follow-up accord. Climate change can be reversed, but action has to be taken now. The delegates in Bali set an example by using bicycles instead of cars. Alternative transport and energy sources are a key to lowering carbon emissions. IPCC Chair Rajendra Pachauri.
Investments in energy infrastructure have to be made in a manner that's going to be climate friendly, because these investments will serve society for a long time to come.
Sustainable development is gaining momentum in many countries. 400 billion plastic bags litter the globe, like these in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. UN agencies helped women here set up a factory to recycle the plastic bags into raw material. With the new plastic, they make rulers. Climate change also affects health. Mosquitoes are extending their reach, and malaria is spreading wider than ever. Little Rachel in Sierra Leone is fighting for her life. UN agencies invest heavily in prevention, from distributing insecticide-treated bed nets to training local volunteers, to studying indigenous medicinal plants that might hold a new cure, hopefully in time to save Rachel and other vulnerable children. Reducing child mortality is one of the Millennium Development Goals. 2007 marked the crucial midpoint in reaching the goal to cut poverty in half by 2015. Many countries are well on track. In Mongolia, mobile schools improve access to education even in remote areas. In Asia, primary school enrollment jumped by 22%. Another goal, sanitation. 2.6 billion people around the world don't have toilets. At a sanitation summit in India, countries pledged to provide facilities to at least half of them by 2015. Africa is lagging behind on most of the Millennium Development Goals. Some African countries are catching up with economic growth rates of 5% and more. Cell phones got cheaper and helped people to communicate and do business. Charging phones got easier too. With new projects, 250 million Africans were connected to electricity. 2007 ended on a positive note. The UN's IPCC and Al Gore were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work to put climate change on the global agenda.
Destined to share the custodianship of planet Earth, we hold the future in our hands. Together, we must ensure that our grandchildren will not have to ask why we have failed to do the right things and left to them to suffer the consequences.